All right, we're going into week 7, and this is where we're going to introduce um, views that kind of defeat themselves or self-defeating views. And you're going to notice that the slide deck isn't super huge, and I didn't go into a ton of depth because I think Koukl covers a lot of the material pretty well and pretty simply. But I'm also going to include a link to some logical fallacies that can be gone over, and they're put really simply, and I can also answer any questions, but this is really just talking about what Koukl calls suicidal views. And this week is all about learning about them, and then how they refute themselves. And the goal really is to just learn how to begin to recognize them, and then in turn point those out to the person that is holding these, self-refuting or suicidal views. And then, when you're pointing these out, you can always use questions to minimize the direct attack of a person's position. So if you're asking questions, well, how would this work? How would this work? In reference to their view or their perspective, you're inquiring information, and as they're answering these questions, they can see the flaws, hopefully, in their perspective. And if you keep asking guided questions, then you can, hopefully point that out in a less direct manner, and something that would be considered less confrontational. All right, so if it's true, then it's false. And I'll explain that shortly. Every statement is about something. So when you make a statement, it's going to be about some certain subject, whatever that subject may be. So every statement is about something, based around the idea of the law of non-contradiction is what this whole week is basically about. These views that defeat themselves are based around the law of non-contradiction. So something cannot be A and not A at the same time, at the same place, and in the same way. So if the view does not satisfy its own criteria of validity, then it would be a self-refuting view. And the example is, there is no truth. So is this statement in fact true? If it is true, then it fails to meet its own criteria, namely that there's no truth. And then if it's not true, then it doesn't really matter because there is no truth. Koukl calls obvious contradictions formal suicide. These are obvious statements that are false. Like, I cannot speak a word of English, and yet you spoke that whole sentence in English. And then if exactly the same reasons in favor of another's view or against your own defeat the reasons themselves, then the view is self-defeating. All right, so hidden suicides. Some views are implicitly contradictory, so they're harder to spot. And then noticing these will take some practice. Find some implicitly contradictory views and study them to hone in your ability to find the flaws. And I will try to provide a couple of examples. I know that Koukl does, but I will try to provide some examples that you guys can look at, and we kind of see as the thoughts develop, you can pick out how it is contradictory. And then to conclude, so suicidal views, as Koukl calls them, are those that defeat themselves. They essentially, with the view, the view itself takes itself down. So use the Columbo tactic to point out these flaws, where you're just gathering information and asking questions. Suicidal views are a violation of the law of non-contradiction. So basically, something within this view will contradict itself. Self-defeating views cannot and do not satisfy their own criteria of validation. And then some views are implicitly contradictory, so practice and study some to get better at spotting the weaknesses. Now, again, this will take some time to get used to, and it's hard for me to cover every view that's out there, every view that does have contradictions in it, and convey that through, a YouTube lecture and, from a long distance away. But I can provide resources, and you can always ask questions, and we can just think through these problems so we can learn what real suicidal views or real self-defeating views look like, what implicitly self-defeating views look like. And the more you adapt your mind to notice these trends and how different things lead to different conclusions, and you'll get better at it, and it'll be easier to spot. So over the next couple weeks, it's going to be going over self-defeating views and things like that, and hopefully you learn something, and hopefully I can give you guys some good resources so you pick it up. All right, everybody be blessed.